Hello to all of the real progressives out there. Thank you so much for tuning in today. I think we have a fantastic show for you, albeit somewhat depressing show. I wish I could bring you some more jovial things over the holidays, but it is unfortunately not in the cards politically right now. Um, we have a whole lot of things to go over today. The reconciliation bill has officially been tanked. We're going to talk about Julian Assange. We're going to talk about Amazon killing their workers or allowing their workers to die in a tornado unnecessarily. We're going to talk about Kellogg's hiring scab workers. We have some more perfect union clips to bring you about labor organizing around the country. We're going to talk about Kamala's humiliating interview where she was asked who's the real president, right? Et cetera, et cetera. Unfortunately, some bad climate news for you all today. Lots of stories to bring you. I did want to start with Real Progressives. We are doing an end of the year fundraiser, you guys, and we would really like you to contribute if you possibly can. We have a very generous donor who is matching contributions through the end of the year. So if you can donate between now and the end of the year, that would be much appreciated. I'm going to show you guys here. And this is in the description box. A link to this is in the description box, where you can find the end of year fundraiser. Jesus, my computer's not wanting to cooperate. Here we go. And I'm going to read you this description here. We are activists, students, teachers, workers, parents, friends, and real progressives volunteers. Our motto has always been each one, teach one. With your generous donation, we can continue to help more people understand essential macroeconomic truths, which will radically shift how we fight for real systemic change and win. We believe once discussions are elevated to critical mass, change will happen faster. When combined with other donations, your gift becomes a powerful means to support our vital work of economic literacy, such as Macro and Cheese. If you are not watching Steve's podcast on Saturdays, it's absolutely fantastic, Macro and Cheese. We do RP Book Club. We do MMT Mondays with Jabari tomorrow. Make sure you don't miss MMT Mondays. The new Untouchables podcast. A couple of seasons are on Real Progress in Action. Find it there. Extensive multimedia content, webinars, summits, conferences, joint actions, and other organizations, with other organizations, live streaming, grassroots actions, etc. I want to make sure that my audience understands. I'm sure a lot of people follow our media and shows like mine, shows like Jody's. We do media. We also do education. We also do outreach and activism. We send educational books to influencers all over the country and politicians all over the country and things. We are engaged in all sorts of things that your donation will help us to be able to continue doing. And I also wanted to add, if you're unable to donate, you can also go to realprogressives.org and support us there, whether you want to become a volunteer, whether you want to share our work, etc. Every little bit helps you guys, and we very much appreciate it. I also wanted to note over the holidays, I know that a lot of people are kind of stepping back from I know in my family we're not doing as many gifts this year. It's just not an economically great time, is it? Right. But if you happen to not really need anything and you have loved ones asking what to get you for the holidays, maybe ask them for a donation to Real Progressives. You get some activism, you get to contribute. It would be a great gift for the progressive people in your life, or something to ask for if you kind of already have all of the things that you need. So I just wanted to make sure everybody knows we're doing this end of year fundraiser. Your donations will be matched through the end of the year. So if you can contribute, we very much appreciate it. So to dive in here, as I said, not a very positive day in terms of the stories. We're going to start with Julian Assange. And I'm sure a number of you have been following this for years. This is in BBC. Julian Assange can be extradited to the US, court rules. WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange can be extradited from the UK to the US, the High Court has ruled. The US won its appeal against a January UK court ruling that he could not be extradited due to concerns over his mental health. Judges were reassured by US promises to reduce the risk of suicide. His fiancée said they intend to appeal. Mr. Assange is wanted in the U.S. over the publication of thousands of classified documents in 2010 and 2011. Senior judges found the lower judge had based her decision in January on the risk of Mr. Assange being held in highly restrictive prison conditions if extradited. However, the U.S. authorities later gave assurances that he would not face those strictest measures unless he committed an act in the future that merited them. Now, there's a lot to say here, isn't there? I first of all want to point out that this whole case has drifted from what really matters here, which is press freedom. Okay, not that I want to be clear. Julian Assange's mental health obviously matters, but insofar as this case influences precedent and insofar as it impacts journalists' ability to do their job. The free press elements of this are astounding. We are prosecuting a journalist for the crime of good journalism. That's what we're doing, you guys. And I want to say again, I know I've said this before. You can take a tough stance on leakers. I don't. I think leakers are heroes. But you can take a tough stance on leakers and still believe that journalists should have the freedom to publish material that they come across. Okay? So the prosecution of Assange is an attempt to outlaw the revealing U.S. secrets. That's really what it boils down to. The government wants to be able to commit war crimes without the threat of somebody leaking those war crimes to a journalist. And if that leak happens, they want to be able to prosecute all involved. They want to scare journalists away from reporting on important stories. It is. I mean, we may as well just throw away the First Amendment if we're going to prosecute Julian Assange. And that's what we're going to do. And I want to point out, you guys, the Biden administration has maintained the Trump administration's position on Assange, which is an even more authoritarian position than the Obama administration took, which is already bad enough. So it's outrageous. And obviously, Julian Assange, the other thing I wanted to point out here, that this case turned into a question of his mental health and potentially being suicidal and the barbaric and dystopian conditions in U.S. prisons. I don't believe for a second that he will not be mistreated. And if you do believe for a second that he will not be mistreated, please DM me, because I have many bridges to sell you. It is so patently obvious that he is going to be abused in U.S. prisons. So whichever lane you want to take here, Julian Assange should be free. He should not be prosecuted. He should not be in a prison anywhere. And he certainly should not be extradited to the United States. This is, again, the epitome of freedom of expression and freedom of the press is threatened here. And the notion that journalists are not going to cover this at all, and that's what we've all seen, right? How many journalists have you seen come out and denounce this? How many journalists have you seen come out and say, this is a threat to my profession, my ability to do my job effectively? How many times have you seen that? Almost none. And when you do, it's not from prominent journalists, usually. So we have this sort of consensus among the corporate press that Julian Assange is a bad guy, which amounts to their willingness to sacrifice their own profession in order to maintain their elite status and their wealth and all that kind of shit. The incentive structures which we have set up in our media are so beyond perverse, I don't even know how to describe it. So I encourage everybody, whatever you can do to support Julian Assange, please do it. Make your voice heard in any which way possible. Protests, calling legislators, whatever. It might sound like it's going to be inadequate, and it probably will be inadequate. But we need to do everything we fucking can to try to halt this destruction of freedom of the press on behalf of the United States government. And shame on the Biden administration, shame on the Obama administration, shame on the Trump administration. This is outrageous, you guys. It's outrageous. Would we have prosecuted Bob Woodward? It's outrageous. So I am very hopeful, but also not naive enough to believe, that Julian Assange will be let free. I also wanted to show you a short clip here. This is actually from his fiance discussing the extradition and, essentially going over the things that I've just talked about. But I wanted to make sure you all saw this.
This goes to the fundamentals of press freedom and of democracy. We will fight. Every generation has an epic fight to fight, and this is ours because Julian represents the fundamentals of what it means to live in a free society, of what it means to have press freedom, of what it means for journalists to do their jobs without being afraid of spending the rest of their lives in prison. The UK imprisons journalists. They're imprisoning Julian on behalf of a foreign power which is taking an abusive, vindictive prosecution against a journalist, and this is what it's about.
absolutely horrific. It's just absolutely horrific. I don't know what to say. Every generation, there are a couple of these fights, you guys, and we have let Julian down. I don't mean my audience in particular. I know my audience probably supports Julian, but we as a society, we have let Julian down. And it's a shame because he's a fucking hero. He revealed war crimes. He did top tier journalism. WikiLeaks engages in the kind of journalism that the mainstream press refuses to. It's a real sad state of affairs when those very corporate talking heads will sit there and condemn Julian for doing their fucking job, a job that they intentionally neglect for their own personal gain. It's outrageous. It makes my blood fucking boil, you guys. Please support Julian Assange in any way that you can. I could go on and on about this. This is such an obvious issue to me. We have another rather outrageous story. I'm sure many of you followed the tornado that tore through a handful of states and killed a whole bunch of people. A lot of those deaths were entirely unnecessary. And I don't even mean in the big picture climate change sense, although that's true too. A lot of these deaths were unnecessary because it was corporate greed and rapaciousness that demanded that workers stay in harm's way, again, out of pure profit incentive. So I have a couple of message threads here to show you guys. One is from a worker at a facility texting his spouse, and the other is a driver who was talking to dispatch. This is shared by Tom Carter. Amazon worker Larry Verdon's last text message to his partner of 13 years, Sherry Jones. Amazon won't let us leave. And you guys can see here, I'll bring it up on the screen. Well, I will be home after the storm. What do you mean? Amazon won't let us leave. All it's doing here is lightning. So what are you doing? I hope everything is okay. I love you. That's the last interaction that Larry had with his spouse of 12 years. Devastating. 13 years. I'm sorry, I undercut that. Devastating stuff. And Amazon should be held criminally liable. They killed their workers. Another one here. This is from a driver texted by Aaron Trailmom. Or I'm sorry, tweeted by Aaron Trailmom. These Amazon texts blow my mind. Anyone who pays attention to weather was watching this tornado come in for 2 hours. They had so much time to ensure that workers were kept safe, but instead they threatened people's employment and kept them in a warehouse with no tornado shelters. We'll bring these texts up on the screen here. Driver says, radio's been going off. The dispatch replies, okay, just keep driving. We can't just call people back for a warning unless Amazon tells us to do so. Driver, just relaying in case y'all didn't hear it over there. Driver, tornado alarms are going off over here. Dispatch, just keep delivering for now. We have to wait for word from Amazon. If we need to bring people back, the decision will ultimately be up to them. I will let you know if the situation changes at all. I'm talking with them now about it. They go on. The driver says, how about for my own personal safety, I'm going to head back. Having alarms going off next to me and nothing but locked buildings around me isn't sheltering in place. That's wanting to turn this van into a casket. Hour left of delivery time, and if you look at the radar, the worst of the storm is going to be right on top of me in 30 minutes. I want to just pause briefly, you guys. How is it that the driver is more up to date and informed about the situation than fucking Amazon is? How is that possible? This driver's out delivering and is more in tune with what's going on than the fucking company is, than the dispatch is. That's pathetic. Driver says it was actual sirens. Dispatch says, quote, if you decided to come back, that choice is yours, but I can tell you it won't be viewed as for your own safety. The safest practice is to stay exactly where you are. What? If you decide to return with your packages, it will be viewed as you refusing your route, which will ultimately end with you not having a job come tomorrow morning. The sirens are just a warning. I'm sorry, what are the sirens warning of, dispatch? What's the point of the sirens if they're meaningless? What an outrageous interaction. This Amazon should be held criminally liable for this. They killed their workers. I don't want to mince words. They killed their workers. And I did want to show you guys a clip here as well of David Sirota reporting on how this has actually been somewhat codified into law, their ability to do this, because most of the workers they put at risk are contractors, not Amazon workers. So this is David Sirota on Breaking Points. We'll watch this, come back and discuss.
For our weekly partnership segment with the Daily Poster is the founder of the Daily Poster himself, the one and only David Sirota. Great to see you, David.
Good to see you. Thanks for having me.
So we've been tracking on the show here damage from those deadly tornadoes, the fact that some of the worst damages were sustained at people's workplaces, a candle factory in Mayfield, Kentucky, where workers were not allowed to leave hours before when they wanted to, and also at an Amazon distribution center in Illinois, where we have looked at the final text of a driver there who wanted to leave. Amazon wouldn't let him go, and ultimately it cost him his life. Talk to us about what you uncovered here in terms of Amazon, lobbyists, and the rights that workers have in their workplaces.
So in Illinois, in the months before this disaster, there's legislation in the Democratic-controlled legislature to change Illinois' laws to say that an employer has to have a just cause in order to terminate a worker. Right now, almost every state in the country is what's known as at-will employment. An employer can fire you for basically almost any reason other than reasons covered in the civil rights laws. But that means if your employer doesn't like let's say, the color of your tie, your employer can fire you. In Illinois, they were trying to change this to say that the employer has to have a just cause. Now, how does that connect to the situation in a disaster like we saw in Illinois? Well, if a worker tries to leave their workplace, they can be threatened with firing. Under the current at-will employment laws. So, in other words, Amazon is empowered to fire its workers if they walk off the job under at-will laws. Amazon-linked lobbying groups, business lobby groups in Illinois, were lobbying against the Just Cause legislation in the lead up to this disaster. Now, to be clear, we don't know in Illinois whether Amazon was trying to keep its workers there out of safety to try to get them to not go out into the tornado or not. But the point here is, the bottom line is that workers in Illinois and across the country essentially do not have, in almost every state protections to be able to leave the workplace or to be able to do anything to make themselves safe without fear of potentially being fired by their employer.
And, it's really interesting, David. I was reading this and looking through, which is that I don't see any consideration of this within the media. I mean, why is it that you're the only person who can seemingly dig this stuff up? People died. I mean, the initial segment, of course, happened, and they reported the investigation. But this is just clear as day here. I mean, I think it's disgraceful.
Yeah, I mean, look, people's employment situation is inherently linked to whether they can blow the whistle on safety problems in the workplace, whether they can leave their workplace in the middle of a natural disaster. I mean, think about how big a problem this is going to end up being. Climate change is intensifying these kinds of weather cataclysms. Workers are facing more and more in the day-to-day. Do I have to come to work during a flood? Do I have to come to work during a hurricane warning? Can I leave my workplace during a tornado warning? Again, without fear of being fired. There were reports that in Kentucky, workers were told they might be fired if they walked off the job. Again, that connects directly to the at-will employment situation throughout the country. And you're right, the media doesn't talk about it because corporate media doesn't typically talk about things that the corporate lobby wants to keep in place. And the corporate lobby wants to keep in place a situation that employers can fire you for any reason at all.
Yeah.
So this is a really important angle, and I want to shout out David for bringing that to the forefront, because it's a mechanism that disallows workers from having any leverage in a situation like this. And we just saw the screenshots. I mean, David said there was reporting that there was threats of you'll lose your job if you don't stay. Well, we literally saw the screenshots. I mean, the dispatcher put it in quotes like it was coming straight from corporate. That was the threat. You will not have a job tomorrow. I mean, they didn't mince words. It was explicit. So this is inhumane. It is barbaric. It is dystopian. And Amazon really genuinely ought to be held criminally liable for this. So, and the at-will employment issue, really important one to highlight as well, you guys, like just in general. Workers have no leverage. And even the exception, which is the civil rights laws, right? So you can't be fired for your race or gender or sexuality. Okay. But actually, I think sexuality is not even included in that. I might be wrong about that. But race, gender, this kind of thing. They still can fire you for it because the burden of proof is on you to demonstrate that that's why they fired you. So, and that's almost impossible to prove in most cases unless they're completely moronic and document it, right? Send an email off, I'm firing this guy because he's black or whatever. Unless they're incredibly stupid about it, they can just come up with whatever they want. As I'll use David's example, I don't like the color of your tie, you're fired. You know, that like they literally can do that. So, and even like I'm in Washington State, a so-called progressive state. We are an at-will employment state here. So you can be fired for almost anything. And that needs to change. And I also just want to point out, I don't understand why this is not getting more attention, you guys. I haven't even seen a whole lot of talk about this on lefty social media. And David, as Sagar kind of pointed out there, like David seems to be the only reporter that is taking this up and trying to bring it to light. So we will see what happens going forward, but it seems like every single week I have another story about how Amazon is abusing, mistreating, exploiting their workers out of pure greed and rapaciousness. And you know, that's hardly surprising, but always worth discussing. This is an outrage, an absolute outrage. The constant unnecessary death and suffering that we allow these corporations to inflict upon people is just outrageous. And that's a nice transition here into our next story. I wanted to talk about the Kellogg situation, which we have covered a number of times previously. The strikes going on at Kellogg, they basically decided to screw over their workers and hire scabs. And I also, actually, let me just take a step back. I wish I would have brought this up to show you guys the screenshot. I meant to. There was a leaked memo from Kellogg's executives basically saying we've come to an agreement where the money doesn't change. They said the bucket of cash is the same. We're just reallocating it. So in other words, they presented an agreement to the union that would not require Kellogg's to pay much more money at all. And they were confident that the union leaders were going to get the organizers to vote in favor of this. They didn't. They rejected it. And then Kellogg said, well, then fuck you. We're going to go hire scabs. And I want to show you guys this because this is hilarious. Then Kellogg's decided to remove their brand from a lot of their products. So this is Pop-Tarts. A Nevada man on Twitter tweeted this at Kellogg's US. Hey, I have a question. Why are you guys removing the Kellogg's branding from specific products that you sell? Is it because of something supply chain issues? Kellogg's actually replied to this. They said, our data show that customers routinely focus on the visual of the Pop-Tarts brand name, so we simplified the package design by removing Kellogg's. Guys, they're just trying to simplify things for their customers. I'm sure that has nothing to do with a successful boycott that they're trying to counter, right? You can't make this shit up. I mean, it's insulting that they think people on Twitter are stupid enough to believe that. Absolutely insulting. And actually, let me just show you guys the ratio here because it's pretty hilarious. 5,829 quote tweets to 423 retweets and 1,200 likes. They got annihilated for this, as they rightly should. So again, it's hardly surprising that Kellogg's would conduct themselves in this way. We've covered previously how they closed stores in my area, in the Seattle area. They closed QFCs and other stores, again, out of pure rapaciousness. And their CEO had no justification for that when he was pressed in the media. Kellogg's they were among the grocery outlets that was boasting about how they were using the price hikes to essentially further gouge their customers because of the expectation of increased prices. Their CEO went and bragged to investors about how they had passed more than the cost along to the customers. In other words, we're exploiting the situation to price gouge people during a pandemic while people are economically struggling. And he's bragging about this openly, publicly to investors. This is the culture of corporate America in a nutshell. It's predictable, it's unsurprising, but it needs to be fought. And I stand in solidarity with these Kellogg's workers, and I hope everybody else will too. And it's just humiliating for Kellogg's to tweet this out, you guys. I mean, it's basically admitting that the boycott's working. Anytime, I wish I remember who tweeted this out, but they said, if anyone ever tells you that boycotts don't work, direct them to this tweet. And that's 100% correct. Absolutely 100% correct. So, shame on Kellogg's. We will keep up with that. And I encourage everybody. There are plenty of sources online that will tell you all of the products that Kellogg's makes because they're removing their brand from their products. I encourage you all to look into that and to stop buying products that are made by Kellogg's. There are also, and this has been fantastic to see, heartwarming to see, people posting, like I saw homemade Pop-Tart recipes and shit being posted online. Like, don't buy Kellogg's. You know what I mean? If you like Pop-Tarts, if your kids like Pop-Tarts or whatever, make them at home or buy some other brand, okay? I encourage everybody to do the research on this and to not cross the picket line. Do not support Kellogg's abuse of their workers in this instance. Stand in solidarity with striking workers and organizing workers everywhere. And in a continuation of the labor organizing stuff, oh, I'm sorry. I have one more thing here to show you guys. I did bring that up. Okay. I'm a little all over the place today. Apologies, everybody. This is the memo I was talking about. This is from More Perfect Union Scoop. A Kellogg's executive sent this email to other members of Kellogg's management bragging about the new tentative deal to end the 10-week strike. Quote, in short, no overall gain for workers with 3 more weeks of strike and no income, no ratification bonus. I'm going to show you guys this whole leak. RTEC contract update. All. We have reached a tentative agreement with the union. We will brief everyone at tomorrow's meeting. In short, overall bucket of money, cost, stays the same. Just shifts money from one bucket to another. No gain overall for them with 3 more weeks of strike and no income. No ratification bonus. We are confident this will pass. Most of the union's negotiating committee is for this and plans to recommend it. I know everyone is tired and tense in the plant, but please try to focus on what we need to do. Please try to keep negotiations talk to a minimum in the plant around the workers. What an admission. Just openly admitting that their negotiation tactics, would clearly influence workers in a direction that they do not want. So again, stand in solidarity with these workers, you guys. Shame on Kellogg's, shame on any other company that treats their workers this way. And I encourage everybody to do their research and make sure you're not crossing that picket line. Boycott them. Boycott them. I am sorry. I think I dropped off there for a minute. I hope I'm back now. Can someone let me know in the comments if you guys can see me? Anyhow, stand in solidarity with those Kellogg's workers. I encourage everybody to do their research. Don't cross that picket line. And make sure that you're participating in helping workers all over the country. So I also have a couple of clips here from More Perfect Union that I wanted to show you guys. This first one is about restaurant workers in New York and how tip workers are so mistreated and how that system is exploitative from the jump. So this is great work from More Perfect Union. As always, I encourage you all to follow them. They do really fantastic stuff. So this is More Perfect Union talking about restaurant workers in New York.
He's like, which one of your parents are white, your mom or your dad? And I was like, excuse me? And he's like, well, you can't just be black. I mean, I see the hair, but you can't be just black because you have manners and you're articulate. You go in the back, you suck it up, just feed them and get out of here. Just make their drinks and get them out of here.
I remember this one situation, it was pretty bad. The customer told me to take my mask down, and if they didn't, then I wouldn't be able to eat tonight. And I'm like, so the customer already knows that they dictate how much we walk home with.
I've been grabbed inappropriately, I've been told dirty, all sorts of things like phone numbers instead of tips and things like that. Managers, like when you talk to them, usually will say like, you should be flattered.
I've been catcalled. I've had married men ask me for my number. I have been touched before.
You just have to keep going, and the abuse becomes normal after a while.
You're used to, okay, I might get touched on today just because, like, they feel like they can, and I feel like I have to because that's how I'm getting paid. You pick up the weekend shifts, you pick up the night shifts, you can maybe make $20 an hour per se. That's with the tips. But if I just take weekdays, probably not up to $10 an hour.
On a week to week, I expect to make at least half of my rent in order to survive. And for the last 4 weeks, I haven't been able to even come close to that. I'm still scratching, trying to grasp at straws to figure out how I'm gonna make it. My week to week is completely in the air. I don't know what to expect.
Nadie de los que trabajamos en esta área restaurantera no tenemos control de nuestras propinas.
I'm fighting for one fair wage because I believe that us service workers should not have to put our wages on the customer. The customer should not have to dictate how much we're walking home with in our pockets each day.
Obviously, my employees are already making one fair wage, so they're fine. But for me as an owner, that means that there are more people who can actually afford to patronize my business. That means people have more purchasing power, they can spend money, it's better for the economy overall, it's better for people who own businesses, because now people can afford to buy what you sell.
Every server and bartender in New York fears for the slow season in the winter because it's truly devastating. You don't know how much you'll get. Having the national minimum wage up to $15, it would help greatly in not worried so much about a slow season.
I just want to live a normal life and not feel like pressured every day, and like the abuse that you might take from customers or the things that you just have to suck it up because these people are the people who are tipping you and they decide how much money you go home with.
As always, fantastic stuff there. And you guys, this really is a significant issue. It allows the wealthy to kind of have it both ways. So the wealthy business owners get to pay less to their workers and expect the customers to fill the gap with tips. And the wealthy patrons of the businesses get to abuse servers. You heard all that. I mean, people touching waitresses inappropriately and servers inappropriately, making comments that are incredibly out of line because they know the server has to be nice to them because they want to tip, right? I mean, listen, I've worked restaurants, you guys, quite a bit. That's really most of the work that I have done while I'm working my way through school. I've mostly been in kitchens, so I haven't had to deal as much with the customers, you know, face to face. But my coworkers have, and the stories that I have heard, you wouldn't believe. I mean, seriously. It's outrageous that customers are able to treat servers and bartenders, etc., this way. And the reason they are is because they have leverage, because they know that server has to smile back because otherwise they're going to lose the tip. So we could create a much healthier work environment for service workers by eliminating sub-minimum tip wages. And we also would then put more of the onus on the business owners to treat their workers well to start with. So it would empower a bartender to kick somebody out and say, no, you're not going to treat me and my coworkers this way. Get the fuck out. You know, it would empower service workers to not have to put up with this kind of abuse because they know their income is not going to take a hit for it, right? So this is a really critical issue, and I would love to see across the country sub-minimum wages disappear. I love seeing, and it's anecdotal, but I've seen, you know, posted on social media and things, and I've even seen myself a couple times. I don't know if you guys have ever been to a restaurant or whatever, and on the door it'll say something like, "We don't accept tips, but we start our workers at fill in the blank 17 or whatever," right? I so prefer that, and they might even put on there, you might notice things are $1 or $2 more, but this is the system we're going to go with, right? And I just so prefer that. The other thing, you guys, and they kind of mentioned this, there's when a large portion of your income is tips, you don't have stability. So you really don't know how much you're going to make in the next couple of weeks, right? You might have some idea based on the season or whatever, but it's really hard to remain financially stable when you don't know what your income is going to be week to week, month to month throughout the year, right? And service the service industry is particularly susceptible to economic downturns, right? Because what's one of the first things that people will cut out if they can't afford luxuries anymore? They're probably going to go buy food at the grocery store and make it at home because it's so much cheaper. They're probably not going to go out and have a couple of cocktails that are expensive when they could just make something at home, right? So one of the first industries that takes a huge hit when the recession, when the economy dips into a recession or even less, just a little dip, you see a lot of service industry, service restaurants, etc., struggling because that's one of the first things that people cut out, right? So there is so much instability here for service workers. It's just a horrendous industry to have to work in. It really genuinely is. And that's too bad because it's one of the most base pleasures that humans have is good food and drink, right? Like it's one of the most obvious like industries to exist. It's never going anywhere because we all like good food and drink and like we're gonna, so it's really sad that we've allowed it to devolve to such an exploitative dynamic like this. And I think we need to get rid of all the sub-minimum wages and eliminate the idea of tips. It would just create a much more secure situation for the workers. It would create a healthier work environment where they don't have to worry about how customers are going to treat them as much and that kind of thing. So great work from More Perfect Union. And I have one more to show you from them. This is HelloFresh. I don't know how many of you guys know the HelloFresh. They're one of those food delivery services where you order meals and then they deliver them to your door. And More Perfect Union went into how HelloFresh abuses their workers as well. So we'll watch this and come back and discuss.
One of our coworkers, she fell on an empty pallet. She tripped on it, and her feet got tangled on the plastic that was in it, and she broke her arm. It was very, very bad.
I was present the day one of my fellow coworkers got her foot crushed by a 300-pound pallet. And I remember seeing the pain in her eyes.
I have a friend at work who told me about her injury. She broke her leg when, while she was working. She slipped over like a piece of a poblano pepper on the floor, right? Which is pretty common in that area.
I want HelloFresh customers to know that everything that they're getting at their doors, like these boxes, we are the workers that make this possible, and we haven't been treated fairly.
HelloFresh workers are organized in a union because we feel we deserve better wages. We don't feel like we're provided a safe and organized work environment to conduct our daily assignments, and we don't feel like we get the dignity and respect that we deserve.
My biggest safety concern at work is that there are so many things on the floor. It can be also water, empty pallets with plastic on, and sticks sticking out of the pallet, which makes it very dangerous for everybody. And it's not a safe place to be working in.
We put ourselves in harm's way for the company, and whenever we do sustain injuries, they remove accountability and place it directly on the employees and the associates.
They push us to do more and more because their goal is just to take out more boxes, not to worry about how the worker feels, how tired they are, or how bad they're hurt, because there are a lot of coworkers, or a lot of my coworkers working with a lot of pain.
They'll go into the bathroom or into the break room to kind of, look for people, or I guess encourage people to hurry back and get back to the production area. But, if you got to use the bathroom, you got to use the bathroom.
Al principio, cuando yo comencé en la línea, eran 250 bolsas por hora, pero luego de eso subieron la cantidad a 275 bolsas por hora. Yo tengo 19 años, tengo 1 año y medio trabajando en HelloFresh, y Antes de eso nunca había sentido tanto dolor de espalda como el que me da ahora. Y pues es muy hostigante porque a la edad que tengo ya padecer de dolor de espalda.
Working for HelloFresh is like you either get a second job or you won't have enough by the end of the month.
A lot of workers that work at HelloFresh have to have 2 jobs just in order to make ends meet, to pay rent, and to put food on the table. A lot of the workers that work at HelloFresh can't even afford a box of HelloFresh. They can't afford the box that they make.
Workers want a union because the pay is so damn low. It's just insanely difficult to live with that wage that we're making. I'm earning $17.50 an hour at HelloFresh.
Management treats HelloFresh workers as employee numbers as opposed to people with real feelings, people with real emotions. There's no compassion for individuals. The only thing that is focused on is profits and numbers.
They are prioritizing only HelloFresh workers to come into these anti-union meetings 2, 3, 4 times every 2 weeks.
They have bring the anti-union people to have these meetings with us and talk about against the union. So we can tell that they are really against of what we're doing.
Basically, there's a lot of union busting going on. They're not respecting the decision that we've made, and it's very immature and unprofessional the way they're handling it after we decided to let them know that we wanted a union.
No nos vamos a dar por vencidos y vamos a seguir organizándonos, nos vamos a mantener todos fuertes porque pues juntos sí somos poderosos.
I couldn't be more happier to go to battle with these people. I mean, I fight with them every day. So just to be in the trenches with this group of individuals is very, very empowering.
I absolutely love how they ended that. It's empowering, you guys. I know if you're in a workplace that is not unionized, it feels so daunting to start taking the steps to work towards a union, right? It feels like everything is against you. But the people you work with every day are probably with you. And that's empowering. We are the many, they are the few, right? I like the way he put that it's empowering to fight with these individuals, right? So I encourage everybody to unionize if you can. We know the tactics that big businesses will use, as HelloFresh uses, as we've covered extensively with Amazon, with Starbucks, et cetera, et cetera. Too many for me to even remember. This is how businesses conduct themselves. But I encourage everybody to fight for a union if you do not currently work in a unionized, in a union workplace. So good on those workers. Shame on HelloFresh. And keep this stuff in mind when you're making your decisions as a consumer, you guys. I know that in many cases, there's no good decision to make. I really do understand that. You stand in a grocery aisle and you see 20 different products and they're owned by 3 different conglomerates and all of them are abusive and there's no responsible choice to make. I really get it. I don't put this on individuals, right? But when you can boycott a Kellogg's, please do. If you can use a different meal service instead of HelloFresh, please do. make as responsible of a decision as a consumer as you possibly can and support these workers. Don't cross those picket lines. And anything going on in your area that pertains to labor organizing, I really encourage you to get involved as best you can. There are almost always strike funds, you guys, and More Perfect Union shares these funds. So you can help these workers by helping provide for them while they don't have income. One of the things that big businesses rely on is they know that their workers can hardly even miss a single shift, let alone go on strike for weeks at a time. And those workers need support. They need to be able to continue the strike. They need to not have their livelihood threatened by this organizing. So go find those strike funds and contribute to them. This is one of the most effective ways to bring about change is labor organizing and hitting big businesses in their pocketbooks. It's one of the very few things that will actually get their attention, that will result in change that is anything beyond symbolic. So I really strongly encourage you all to support unions, support More Perfect Union, support labor organizers, donate to strike funds if you can, obviously, and we will continue to cover this stuff going forward. And you know, More Perfect Union, they put out a few of these a week, you guys. They did a Baskin and Robbins one too, but I didn't want to just pile on the More Perfect Union videos. So please go check them out. They do absolutely outstanding work. They're constantly calling out big businesses and bringing this stuff to light. And by the way, HelloFresh went and complained to Twitter and got that video taken down temporarily. So they're terrified. They're terrified, and they should be. So we're going to cut into their billions in profits, right? Wah. Anyhow, support unions, support workers, support labor organizing as best you can. So I want to show you guys here. I'm sure a number of you have seen this, but it's an incredibly humiliating clip. This is Kamala Harris being interviewed by Charlemagne, who pressed her in ways that the mainstream media entirely refuses to. This is probably the first hard question that Kamala Harris has gotten as vice president. It's not even a hard question. It's an obvious question. But her response, you guys, she finger wags. She gets up on her pedestal. Then she says, you sound like a Republican, or you're talking like a Republican, which is their reflexive response to any criticism from the left. You sound like Trump, right? It's nonsense. And then she goes on to list a bunch of things, many of which they have gutted from their own bill, which just crashed and burned, as though it was some sort of accomplishment that she and Joe had achieved. This was an utter embarrassment. And if you haven't seen it, I apologize, but I do have to show it to you.
Madam Vice President.
Come on, Charlemagne.
I really,
Come on. It's Joe Biden.
I can't tell sometimes.
No. It's Joe Biden. It's Joe Biden. And don't start talking like a Republican about asking whether or not he's president. It's Joe Biden.
Do you think Joe Manchin is a problem?
It's Joe Biden, and I'm vice president, and my name is Kamala Harris. And the reality is, because we are in office, we do the things like the child tax credit, which is going to reduce Black child poverty by 50%, on track to do that. We do things that are about saying that our Department of Justice is going to do these investigations and require that we end chokeholds and have body cameras. It is the work of saying we're going to get lead out of pipes and paint because our babies are suffering because of that. It is the work of saying people who ride public transit deserve the same kind of dignity that anybody else does. So let's...
Where do I even start? Where do I even start? Any criticism from the left, you're immediately a Republican. And then I'm going to wag my finger at you and say, Joe Biden is president. And this is where, like, guys, just in general, if you're the vice president of the United States and you feel the need to say, I'm the vice president and my name is Kamala Harris, you're toast. You're absolutely toast. That's so humiliating. And then she goes on to talk about the child tax credit, which they're ending. She goes on to talk about environmental stuff while they're allowing, what's the word I'm looking for? Blanket on the word. They're allowing more drilling permits, fracking permits, etc. Dozens of them. You want to talk about environmental issues? Give me a fucking break. You gutted your own bill of all the consequential environmental provisions in favor of big oil and natural gas. And then even that bill went and crashed and fucking burned in a train wreck. And she wants to stand there and brag about all the things that they've done. I mean, it's where do you even start? And the attitude too. Is it ever effective to look at a voter and it's so pathetic and pitiful and humiliating. It's secondhand embarrassment. It's the Democrats reaping what they sow for their decision to shove Kamala down our throats after she was such a miserable failure in the primaries. After voters told everybody what they thought of Kamala Harris, the Democrats were like, yeah, no, let's shove her down their throat. Maybe she'll win in 2024. Guys, if she's on the ticket, it's going to be a historic loss. Historic. I don't know that she'll be quite Mondale, but she will be a historic loss. And it's just, you know, that's her response to a, like, it's really not even a challenging question. It's really not even a challenging question. And her refusal to answer the follow-up. Did you guys hear what Charlemagne said after her initial response? He said, something about like, do you oppose Joe Manchin? Do you condemn Joe Manchin for tanking this bill or whatever? And Kamala just ignores it. Ignores it because Manchin is playing a very, very important role for the Democratic Party, which is the rotating villain, so that they can have it both ways. They can vocally say they support things that they obviously do not support or have any willingness to fight for, and then they can hide behind, well, Joe Manchin won't do it. And another thing, back in 2018, when Manchin's last election, he's up again in 24. Kamala Harris sent out emails. She was then a senator, right? Sent out emails basically begging people to donate to his campaign. Okay. So you see, they've gone full mask off with all of this shit. And it's just utterly humiliating. It makes me physically cringe to watch that interview. And that was, again, not a difficult question. And I just, again, want to put this in the context of how the press conducts themselves. Shame on the mainstream press who consider themselves journalists, who can't be bothered to ask such an obvious question as, hey, who the fuck's in charge? You guys keep folding and groveling to parliamentarians and Joe Manchins and Kirsten Sinemas. Who's in charge? Who's running the country? We're going to get into student debt here momentarily. Another one where it's like, who's in charge? You have the authority to do something and you blame Congress. You know, it's pathetic. It's impotent. It's any, fill in the blank. But it's going to result in them getting mollywopped next year and in 2024, especially if they run Kamala on the top of the ticket. So, hey, shout out to Charlemagne for actually, asking a mildly pressing question. And, what a humiliating response from Kamala there, which is, again, to be expected. You guys, every time she has this problem where her approval tanks when she hides, and then it tanks even faster when she actually comes out in the public and says something. And you see why there. I mean, you guys, I thought that I would never see a politician less talented than Hillary Clinton. And I don't mean like take the ideology out of it. I literally just mean, how effective are you at winning over voters and gaining support and being viewed popularly, or favorably rather? I thought, boy, I'm never going to see someone worse at that than Hillary Clinton. Kamala's given her a genuine run for her money. Genuine run for her money. Who do you guys think is worse? I mean, seriously, I'd be honestly curious to hear from the audience on this. You guys think Kamala's a worse politician or Hillary? They're sure right there neck and neck as far as I can tell, right? And the Democrats, it's almost like they're masochistic. It's almost like they get pleasure out of being crushed electorally because they continue to make such brazenly unhelpful decisions if their goal is actually to win and to maintain power. So what an embarrassing interview for Kamala. As I said, I wanted to talk about student debt. This is a tweet here from Brianna Joy Gray, who's obviously fantastic. She was Bernie's press secretary and now does the Bad Faith podcast. So Jeff Charlotte here tweeting, "What the fuck, Joe Biden?" with this screenshot. Sources told me that one administration official in the meeting suggested that overall the pandemic was trending in the right direction and that resuming student loan payments is part of getting back to normal. You run on something and then you just say, well, never mind. And Brianna Joy Gray here retweeting this with this screenshot. 89% of student loan borrowers aren't ready to pay student loans. A new survey from Student Debt Crisis Center, a nonprofit focused on student loan debt, found some alarming statistics. Yeah. Obviously, people are not capable. People pre-pandemic were struggling to pay back their student loans. They were incredibly burdensome, even pre-pandemic. And Biden here reneging on yet another of his campaign promises. And you guys, if this doesn't elucidate you on what the Democrats truly are, I mean, we can go issue by issue by issue. They break their promises. They talk a big game during the election season, and then they do nothing. They've been promising a lot of these things in the reconciliation bill for 10 or 15 years. They have twice been given both houses and the White House, and they have done fuck all about it. What have we gotten, you guys? We got an infrastructure bill that was a handout to big business and that actually was a negative for environmental issues. What did we get under Obama? We got a health care plan written by the Heritage Foundation that was initially endorsed by Richard Nixon and the likes of Bob Dole and Chuck Grassley. It was first implemented by Mitt Romney in Massachusetts. We got a far-right health care plan when we elected Democrats and gave them as much power as we could. They went back on everything they promised. And then a decade later, what'd they do? They ran on the same shit and then some, went back on all of that too. It's pathetic. The fact that anybody still falls for their line of, well, we really want to. I mean, how naive can you possibly be? Gullible is written on your ceiling. So student loan debt cancellation here. This is another one where Biden has gone back on his promises. And I also wanted to show you guys here a tweet from Owen Higgins talking about the politics of all this. He says, Jesus fucking Christ. Shares a screenshot here. I'll read this whole thing. One such tense meeting described by someone familiar with what happened in the conversation happened Wednesday. This is, by the way, about loan forgiveness, as they say. Your loan forgiveness advocates relayed to members of Biden's domestic policy and economic teams that beyond the actual economic, legal, and policy implications of lifting the loan repayment pause, the move was bad politically. They wanted to sound the alarm to them about what we believe to be a very serious political mistake that they're about to be making. A second source familiar with the conversation told me, Team Biden was not moved. Multiple sources familiar with what was said at the meeting described the administration's message as effectively that borrowers had 2 years to prepare for this and knew the pause wouldn't last forever. Gee, I think that borrowers, unfortunately, may have taken Joe Biden at his word on the campaign trail. Why would they have been preparing for this, Joe, when you promised to cancel at least $10,000? At different times, he said $10,000 or $50,000 of student loan debt. Aren't you a man of your word? Shouldn't people have taken you seriously when you said that? Why would they have been planning for the last 2 years to repay these loans that you said you were going to cancel? You fucking liar. Jesus fucking Christ is right. Owen is spot on. It's one of the dumbest political moves I have ever seen, and that is really saying something. For them to let the child tax credit run out here and force people to start paying back their student loans in an election season while they renege on all their other promises. I mean, it's just, what do they expect to happen at the ballot box, you guys? How on earth do they expect to win people over? It's like they want to lose. I am struggling to draw any other conclusion outside of they would like to lose. They don't like having power. They'd rather be the opposition party and just fundraise on how terrible Republicans are. It's like the abortion issue. They won't codify Roe with legislation because it's better for them to just fundraise on the issue. So fuck women, fuck the right to choose. We'd rather be able to fundraise and run on Roe v. Wade. I mean, they're just full mask off here, you guys. It's full mask off. I am hopeful that this will wake some people up who were previously asleep. We've all had to have our awakening, you guys. Like we all, I voted for Barack Obama. It's one of the biggest regrets of my life. I didn't know. I didn't pay close enough attention. We all have to learn at some point, right? And come to the conclusion that this party is useless. It is not a vehicle for change. It is a vehicle for the status quo. It is a party that acts as a gatekeeper for the Republicans, who have gone off the cliff to the right. And by the way, the reason they went off the cliff to the right, the reason the Republicans could go off the cliff to the right, is because of Bill Clinton and the New Democrats. So the Democrats chased the Republicans off the cliff to the right. That's the role they play. So don't tell me that voting for Democrats is somehow going to bring about progressive change, because it is very obviously not, and all of the evidence points to that. But this is just, this is quite explicit. It's really quite explicit for them just to be completely reneging on everything that they promised just a year ago. It's just quite something. I wanted to talk a little bit about Rahm Emanuel. He has not gotten a whole lot of attention in the media, unfortunately, and I'm not really sure why, because he's one of these characters that really, not a lot of people like Rahm Emanuel, you guys. It's really only hardcore partisan Dems who have anything nice to say about this sack of human excrement. For those that don't know, Rahm was the mayor of Chicago, oversaw police brutality and the covering up of police brutality. He contributed to gentrification because he's tied in with big real estate, all sorts of stuff. He closed a whole bunch of public schools, supporting charter schools instead. And he has now been confirmed as the ambassador to Japan. So this again, it's like if you think there wasn't a more qualified person than Rahm Emanuel, you're out to lunch. That the Biden, I don't even know how to break down this psychology. That the Biden administration was like, yeah, he's one of the least popular people around. Why don't we appoint him to an ambassadorship? It's like they want to lose. What is he getting out of Rahm Emanuel that he couldn't have gotten out of somebody else who was qualified to be ambassador to Japan? Nothing. What he's getting is playing the elite game. It's their little sick circle of fucks that they keep empowering. There's nothing outside of personal relationships that would justify this. So I'm not going to read this, but you guys can see there Rahm Emanuel thanking senators for confirming him as ambassador to Japan. And again, I'm surprised this has gotten so little coverage. It did get quite a bit of coverage when Rahm was floated for Office of Management and Budget, which is probably a more consequential role, certainly domestically a more consequential role than ambassador to Japan. There was a lot of pushback, even from some mainstream types. There was pushback, and so Biden backed off on that. There was another position he was floated for too, but it's escaping me. Office of Management and Budget was the big one, and OMB director. And there was genuine pushback, again, even from mainstream sources when he was floated for that. So it's confounding to me that this has received so little coverage, even among lefty circles. Rahm Emanuel, horrendous pick for ambassador to Japan, one of the worst politicians around. And again, that's quite a standard, right? It's really saying something. So I just wanted to make sure to touch on that. It's not surprising that Biden would do this. It's a little bit surprising that it's been so undercovered, I suppose. I'm sure a number of you saw this devastating story about a trucker in Colorado who's received 110 years in prison for an accident that was not his fault. This is a thread from Eric. I've done that twice when I read this guy's threads. Alec Karakatsanis, who does fantastic work on Twitter. Thread: a young trucker whose brakes failed before a crash that killed 4 people just got sentenced to 110 years in prison. Mandatory death in prison for a crash he didn't intend. There are several very important and hidden things going. First, a great irony of U.S. law is that it purports to set a high standard of evidence beyond a reasonable doubt to convict a person, but it allows human caging of millions without a shred of evidence that the sentence does any good. In fact, most sentencing in the U.S. is unconstitutional. Constitution requires judges to apply strict scrutiny when a fundamental right is taken away, and bodily liberty is such a right. This means sentence must be as narrowly tailored as possible to serve a compelling interest. One of the great scandals of modern U.S. legal system is that no U.S. court opinion has ever meaningfully reconciled this basic tension between the Constitution and mass human caging. I wrote about it in my book, Usual Cruelty, here. Second, sentences like mandatory 110 years for this traffic crash reflect a deep pathology in U.S. system to try to blame bad people when harm happens. This is by design. It's profitable to people who control systems of harm to get us blaming individuals for mass social harm. You guys, this speaks to critical legal theory and critical race theory. We need to evaluate society on a macro level and evaluate the systemic oppression and not allow the hyper-individualistic tendency to blame individuals and engage in character assassinations. That's not activism or politics of any sort. What it is virtue signaling. And that is how the powerful like it, because that leaves them to maintain the systems that oppress all of us to their benefit, right? Third, the prosecutor hit him with mandatory 110 years in prison, sent him to die in a cage as an old man because he didn't want to plead guilty. He exercised his right to a jury trial. The prosecutor hid the sentence from the jury. Where do you even start with that? Finally, left out of almost every article on these cases is what going to prison means in our society. Rampant sexual assault, infectious disease, never hugging your family, scandalous lack of medical care, pervasive physical beatings, and torture of solitary confinement. Our Constitution disallows cruel and unusual punishment, and yet we engage on it in an incredibly regular basis. We were speaking a bit about this as it pertained to Assange earlier. U.S. prison system is barbaric. And this individual, for those that like, his brakes went out. His brakes went out. This could happen to any of us, you guys. Your brakes could go out on the road, and then people could die from a crash. You could be prosecuted, 110 years in prison, okay? Now, I want to compare this to the case of Ethan Couch. This was tweeted by Mexican rug dealer. Ethan Couch killed 4 people while driving drunk. His BAC was 0.24. Guys, that is 3 times the legal limit. He fled the country. He was only given 10 years probation and then 720 days in jail for violating his probation. Rogel Aguilera Moderos, I apologize if I butchered that, was sentenced to 110 years for an accident killing 4 because his brakes failed. And that's the story we just covered. And I also wanted to note, you guys, part of Ethan Couch's defense here, his attorneys argued something called affluenza. Affluenza is basically saying that someone is so rich and out of touch that they don't understand the consequences of their actions. That's what got Ethan Couch off for driving drunk, killing people. Meanwhile, a guy whose brakes go out, a truck driver whose brakes go out, gets 110 years in prison. You know who should be held liable for those brakes going out? The company he works for. It's their job to maintenance the equipment. So, you know, this is just another example of how inhumane and unjust our so-called justice system actually is. And I also wanted to show you guys here, this is a little bit heartwarming as a result of this. I don't have audio, but you guys can see here, trucks lined up, refusing to enter Colorado because of this verdict. So it's anecdotal, and the guy who posted it said it's anecdotal. He doesn't have statistics, but it looks like there are quite a few truckers who are going to take a stand here. I'll read what he had to say. This is Joshua Potash, or Potash, however you pronounce it. Truckers aren't entering Colorado in protest of Rogel Lazaro Aguilera Maderos getting a 110-year sentence after his brakes failed and his truck killed 4 people. A tragedy the company should be liable for. I think we're about to see the power of truckers. And obviously truckers have an inordinate amount of power because so many industries rely upon shipments. So truckers, if truckers wanted to bring the economy to a halt, they could in an instant, like seriously, in an instant. Another such group is shipping, right? If those who work the docks where container ships and things come in, if they wanted to just go on strike, the whole economy would come to a halt, right? To some degree or another, same with shipments by flight. There are certain industries that just have that chokehold. If they really want to make a difference, they can. And I hope that this comes to some sort of fruition. I hope that that there is some sort of action because of this wonderful attempt from these truck drivers to make a difference here. And I mean, imagine, you guys, imagine if you were a truck driver and you watched this all happening and you're like, that could be me. That very easily could be me. I mean, just, you know, heartbreaking stuff, but it is heartwarming to see the response from some of these truckers, and I hope that it comes to some sort of fruition. So, as I said, we wanted to talk a little bit about the reconciliation bill. And we've talked earlier about some of the other issues that Democrats have reneged on. This is in Mother Jones. Joe Manchin officially torpedoes Build Back Better. I object to that framing. Joe Manchin didn't torpedo the bill. The Democrats who refused to fight for it torpedoed the bill. The Democrats who decoupled it from the infrastructure bill tanked the bill. Joe Biden's refusal to fight for this tanked the bill. You're mad at the wrong Joe, as Afeni tweeted out earlier. Joe Manchin is the excuse. He's the rotating villain. It's official. Senator Joe Manchin said this morning on Fox News that he won't support the Build Back Better bill, effectively killing the Democratic Party's $2 trillion sweeping domestic policy proposal. I tried everything humanely possible. I can't do it, he said. Bullshit. This is a no on this legislation. I have tried everything I know to do. What does that even mean, you guys? By the way, Manchin initially came out during the campaign season and said he was in favor of $5 trillion. Now he thinks $2 trillion is too expensive. So I don't mean to at all excuse Joe Manchin's role in this. I want to be very clear. He's awful, and he should be primaried from the left. I hope that happens. Same with Sinema. But the Democrats' propensity to lean on this as though it is not their fault is outrageous. They've supported Manchin and Sinema. In fact, they condemn lefties who want to primary these people. They're reaping what they've sown. And that's intentional because it allows them to play it both ways. It allows them to rhetorically support positions that they refuse to fight for and then hide behind Joe Manchin. So how many promises is that going back on between negotiating their own bill into oblivion and then tanking what was left? How many campaign promises is that they've just broken? It's just and again, like, I'm part of why I'm astounded by this is how stupid it is politically. Like, to just briefly go back to the student debt stuff we were talking about earlier. I don't know how many of you saw this when Jen Psaki was pressed lightly on this. Again, no one actually presses these people, but when Jen Psaki was pressed lightly on this, her response was, "We'll sign a bill when Congress sends it to us." Well, this isn't. The education secretary has the power. This is not up for debate. Has the power to cancel student loan debt. That's not up for debate. So for her to blame Congress, you guys, it's not only screwing over millions of Americans who hold trillions of dollars in debt. It is also to blame vulnerable Democrats who are likely to lose next November. She's pointing the finger at them and saying it's their fault. If you're mad about student loan cancellation, blame them. How do you think that's going to play out in November? I mean, it's a degree of political ineptitude that is honestly hard to even describe or fathom. And that's the part that makes me sincerely wonder if they just would rather lose and if they're just explicitly gatekeeping for Republicans, because there's just no other sensible answer to their conduct on these issues. So another sort of upsetting story that speaks to the dystopian nature of our country. I don't have audio on this. I'm sure a number of you saw this. This is in South Dakota during intermission at a hockey game. This is teachers grabbing dollar bills off the ground. This was their intermission entertainment. So because we refuse to provide supplies to teachers and because we so grossly underpay and mistreat them, this was treated as some sort of cute thing. You know, it reminds me of like when some kid opens a lemonade stand to pay for their parents' cancer treatments, and then the media covers that as though it's heartwarming. You know, we live in this dystopian nightmare, and this is how willing they are to just put that right front and center. And this is how out of touch many in the press are. I mean, look at this. Here they go, says Annie Todd. Exciting stuff, right? It's nauseating. If that doesn't make your stomach churn, there's something fucking wrong with you. So I just thought this was worth sort of highlighting as an example of how out of touch people are, how dystopian our society is. We ignore systemic problems in favor of individual stories. And this is another example of that. Oh, look, this teacher got $100 for supplies. Yeah, because they're so mistreated in the first place. It shouldn't be needed. It's I don't feel the need to say a whole lot more about that. I think you guys understand, but I wanted to make sure everybody saw that. And it's not. I'm not surprised by the way we treat teachers so much as I'm surprised by how out of touch. Like, how many people had to approve that, you guys? The people who work in the arena had to approve that. By the way, this was all put on by some sort of like financial company, if I understand correctly. You can't make this shit up. You just can't make this shit up. How many people had to approve that? How many people thought that was a good idea? Upon how many people's desk did that memo come and they thought, oh yeah, that's cute. Let's have teachers on their hands and knees fighting for dollar bills. That looks really great. I mean, I'm somewhat frustrated today by how outrageous some of these stories are, because I don't know how to even break some of them down. They're just so explicitly ridiculous and outrageous. So anyhow, I want to encourage everybody to take a critical eye on stories like that. Look at this. Look at systems, guys. Look at the problems to start with. Don't fall for this heartwarming individual story nonsense. Okay, like the kid who's selling lemonade to pay for their parents' cancer treatments or whatever. That's dystopian. That's depressing. That's awful. In what other country would that be the case? I'm reminded of, Breaking Bad. That story makes no sense in most places around the world. They're like, wait, this guy has to cook meth to pay for his cancer treatments? Like, what? That story makes no sense in most countries around the world, but in the United States, it makes perfect sense, and I'm sure all too many people can relate to that type of notion. So I want to read from a Real Progressives article here. This is about inflation. This is from a month ago, but it does still apply. And again, realprogressives.org, you guys, if you want to find fantastic content like this, we have articles, we have podcasts, all sorts of stuff for you. This is from Artemis Salisbury. Don't call it inflation. It's capital retaliation. Capitalists have one motive: profit. It doesn't matter to them what the real costs are to regular people or the planet itself. They use their control of production, including media, to sell regular people on false notions of markets and free trade. The capitalists claim that allowing the teeniest fraction of humanity, themselves, to hoard the value the rest of us create, as well as determine the outcomes and direction of our labor and production, is not only acceptable, but somehow desirable, freeing, and inevitable. Of course, capitalism in any form is none of the above for the 99% and our planet. The freedom capitalists preserve is their freedom to exploit resources, oppress and divide people, and convert the living green earth into dead bricks of luxury. And it takes a great deal of narrative management and indoctrination to achieve this relatively static status quo. When those same markets tip in favor of workers, no matter how briefly or insignificantly, the capitalists cry out and use their apparatus in media, government, and private institutions to retaliate at the slight against their perceived or projected possible gains. This is the material force behind the surge of labor shortage and now inflation propaganda being hammered over all outlets controlled or influenced by capitalists, which is virtually all outlets that exist. And a tweet here from Stephanie Kelton. Can the U.S. government run out of U.S. dollars? Can a soccer stadium run out of points? Until people figure out the parallel, austerity comes. That is the mechanism that allows all of this to be. Yes, prices are rising. No, it is not inflation. Inflation is so often used, really misused, as a boogeyman that common perception of the word's meaning and what the impact and cause of inflation is completely out of alignment with reality. The federal government creates its currency, the US dollar, and then creates a tax obligation for users of that currency in order to create demand and value in the dollar. Federal spending is the birth of all existing dollars, known as the money supply, and federal taxation is the death of some of those dollars. The remaining dollars in supply become the deficit and debt. But this debt isn't owed to anyone. It's the other side of the balance sheet. Guys, understand, every debt is someone else's surplus. So when we fearmonger about the national debt, we're fearmongering about our own surplus, our own money supply. If the national debt were wiped out, there would be none of the US dollars left, leaving no money in anyone's hands. It can't run out of dollars any more than a carpenter can run out of inches. That's a great quote from Stephanie Kelton. You guys, dollars are just, it's a measurement. It's a unit of account. Capital flight is one form of capital retaliation where the parasitic owning class will depart from a region, taking with them their investments and accumulated wealth due to a relative increase in their tax burden at the municipal or state level. This is also called the race to the bottom. There are plenty of other forms of capital retaliation, however. There's also corporate lobbying, as well as both corporate and individual contributions to politicians, PACs, and nonprofits by the managers in the middle class and their owners in the capitalist class. Making nonprofit work dependent on grants and contributions from the wealthy kneecaps the range of impact a given nonprofit can have. Further, when local, state, and federal grants and other funding mechanisms are appointed to individual capitalists or their private organizations to steward and direct the flow of public funding into not-for-profit organizations, this only compounds the control capitalists have over the public and the level they can corrupt public works and the very notion of the public purpose. In real time, Americans are experiencing capital retaliation in the form of increased punitive policies to force the working class to work for less, propaganda about a labor shortage that includes an unspoken but ever-present mandate that workers need to do their part to preserve the boss's profits or the economy or national well-being. Additionally, there is an increasingly aggressive campaign to redefine labor relations by urbanizing all work. By Uberizing all work, the ride sharing and all that. All work and economic relationships. This campaign is being waged in order to reduce workers' power before the nascent labor awakening turns into a militant labor movement. Add to all this the deliberate spiking of prices for basic needs like groceries, gasoline, rent, and utilities, while capitalists are using Jesus, I can't read today, you guys. I'm sorry. While capitalists are using capitalist control of institutions and the media to say the rise in prices is nothing other than inflation. When combined, a clear and aggressive campaign of class unity among the capitalists becomes apparent. Not only do capitalists have unity as a class, they also have a unifying purpose, profits, and the resources to further their control of everyone and destruction of everything. Quote, "Goodbye, Bill. I die like a true blue rebel. Don't waste any time in mourning. Organize." That's a famous quote from Joe Hill before he was executed. In reality, when you break down the rise in prices, we're not seeing inflation. We're seeing the natural outcome of markets when supply chains are squeezed, production costs go up, so goods are sold at a premium. Further, we're likely seeing an artificially added fee being figured into those increased costs to punish working people for the market tipping ever so slightly in their favor. This is the capital retaliation fee, and that's what we were talking about earlier with Kroger boasting about how they're basically making consumers pay for this and then some. The fee would be the addition, right? They're just money grabbing. In other words, the owners are punishing the rest of us using their control of the means of production and the markets in which the products of the working class's labor are distributed. They seek to depress our wages and force us to give up the very slight gains in class awareness and labor militancy while raising the prices on the very things we need to survive. They want to make us believe these price increases are the fault of the government for throwing a few breadcrumbs our way. Those breadcrumbs being stimulus checks and enhanced unemployment benefits. If we let the portion of the ruling class who advocate for fully paid for federal policy win their so-called balanced budget, there would be $0 left over at the end of each year. That is the only way to eliminate the deficit. Tax 100% of the dollars created in a given year out of existence. Worse still, in order to eliminate the national debt, policy would have to be crafted that would effectively tax everyone at more than 100% in order to wholly destroy the money supply. Again, the national debt is a running total of all dollars created since the beginning of the country, minus the dollars destroyed through federal taxation. In other words, the only way to eliminate the national debt is to leave zero or even a negative balance of money in everyone's hands. Regardless of what the media tries to tell us, there are only two real-world reasons prices are rising at this time: distribution to the supply chain and capital retaliation. And then the sources are listed. Great work from Artemis there. And again, I want to encourage everybody to go to realprogressives.org to find other fantastic content, political, economic, and otherwise educational, etc. So understand, I really want everyone to understand. Inflation is, I think Walker Bregman tweeted this out the other day, right? As more people understand that debt and deficit fear-mongering is nonsense, they're going to turn to fear-mongering about inflation. That's just the natural sort of transition, okay? And I do want to be clear, MMT acknowledges that inflation is a constraint on spending. But I also want to be clear that we're nowhere near reaching that being a problem. We're nowhere near full employment, so we can't be anywhere near true inflation. So it's not that inflation is not real. It's not that inflation is not something to consider. It's that is not what is happening right now, and you are being misled by the press and by the corporate overlords into thinking it is, so that you'll oppose said breadcrumbs, the stimulus checks, etc. The idea that $1,200 going to each person created massive inflation is so ludicrous and outrageous. And yet mainstream economists will tout that shit. The mainstream press will tout that. And then the Krogers of the world will use it as an excuse to further price gouge their customers while they continue to neglect their workers and close stores. They want it both ways, you guys. And when they can't have it both ways, they throw a fucking temper tantrum. So when the markets are such that there is even the slightest bit of leverage that workers have, they throw a temper tantrum. When they can't exploit their workers to the maximum degree, they whine and cry and bitch about it. It's pathetic. It's pitiful. And yet, unfortunately, a great deal of people tend to fall for this kind of shit. So great work again from Artemis, you guys. And I just want to make sure that my audience understands that what we're seeing right now is not a result of overspending or anything close. Okay. We have another very interesting story here. This is again from Alec Karakatsanis. I didn't call him Eric that time, notice. Thread, have you wondered about the secret targeting of Nipsey Hussle by cops before his death? Internal docs from LAPD now reveal a dystopian campaign to target Nipsey and pervasive corruption to benefit real estate developers. Some of that stuff in here is chilling. For those that don't know, Nipsey Hussle was a rapper who was shot and killed, I want to say a couple of years ago. I might have that timeline a little bit backwards, but and he was in LA when he was killed. Lived in LA, and by the way, was really working to uplift his community and help working class people and minorities and things. He was really trying to be a positive influence on the LA community, and he was murdered. Okay, the story begins when Nipsey fulfilled his longtime dream of buying the Marathon clothing store. The city, developers, and police had other plans for the property, and they began a years-long effort of surveillance and brutality to try to stop it. In one internal document generated by Palantir, a corporation that profits by helping police cage poor people more efficiently with big data, LAPD records appear to show 58 stops and 7 arrests at the intersection outside Nipsey Hussle's store in the week after its grand opening. Incredibly, a similar document dated 2 weeks after Nipsey opened his store shows a single patrol car made 103 stops and 3 arrests in 7 days. All of this police activity was supposedly searching for a generically described suspect, quote, a black male between 16 and 18 years old. This targeted police violence was the culmination of a long campaign by police and City of Los Angeles attorneys to target Nipsey and others in the community to prevent them from investing in land that big banks and developers wanted. Here's what Nipsey said, quote, this was always one of our dreams. In this parking lot, we were always outside hustling in the actual lot, and we realized it made sense to be owners or for us to have businesses in this parking lot. The desire for people from that predominantly black community to be owners brought out the full force of LAPD, the City of Los Angeles bureaucracy, big banks, and wealthy real estate developers intent on using Trump's opportunity zones to extract billions from poor communities. But it wasn't just Nipsey. Across Los Angeles and across the U.S., police have worked hand in hand with tech companies and real estate developers to build the bureaucratic architecture of control that enables them to control who owns what and where and who invests in what and where. If you want to understand how police work with wealthy investors to enable gentrification and wealthy extraction on a massive scale, you must read this report by people from the community in Los Angeles. It's long, but it will change how you see the world. Encourage you all to follow Alec and go read this stuff. He's really, really fantastic. He's bringing stuff to light that a lot of people tend to ignore. If you're interested in further reading on the massive collaborations between police, developers, banks, tech companies, retail industry, and prosecutors, you can follow Stop LAPD Spying and check out more here. In addition to the report, you can learn more from this great reporting from Sam T. Levin. So this is essentially a conspiracy among LAPD and prosecutors and big business types in LA to keep working class people in the black community from owning businesses. What an outrageous admission. What 103 stops and 3 arrests in a week from one single patrol car. You can't make that stuff up. That's almost even hard. Like you'd have to spend the whole fucking week there. Outrageous stuff. And I don't want to I have no idea what circumstances surrounded Nipsey's death. It was apparently a rival who killed him. How many times have we seen in these kinds of situations, you guys, that there was some behind the scenes collaboration with perhaps the FBI or perhaps LAPD or NYPD or who knows? I'm not, don't nobody sue me. I'm not saying that's the case, but I would not be surprised if we learn more about the circumstances surrounding Nipsey's death, because he was engaging in the kind of organizing and activities that the ownership class and prosecutors and police do not want to see happen. It threatens them. It threatens their stranglehold on the rest of us. So tragic death, a tragic situation all around, and good on Alec for bringing to light the role that LAPD and prosecutors played in attempting to prevent Nipsey from succeeding in business in the LA area. It also goes very much against this idea of free markets, capitalism, right? Would I have to face that if I went to open a business in LA? We all know I wouldn't, because of the color of my skin. We all know that I wouldn't have to face the same kind of issues that Nipsey did. Not that LAPD would necessarily like me all that much, but you guys get what I'm saying. This idea that you just have to work harder, it's outrageous. Look at all the hurdles that are faced by impoverished people, by racial minorities, etc. So again, great work there from Alec, and shame on LAPD for that one. I do want to talk briefly about COVID here, you guys. I am so incredibly discouraged by the state of COVID discourse. It seems like everybody has allowed their brains to be broken by this invented culture war between the brunch liberals and the megas that has been inflamed by the media. I have had so many opinions projected upon me because I think we should take COVID seriously. So people just start making assumptions. If you say, hey, I encourage people to get vaccinated and I think we should take the pandemic seriously, people all of a sudden say you're a shill for big pharma, or you're they just jump to these absolutely insane conclusions. And it's because this has been reported as a false dichotomy, as though you either think that vaccines and vaccines alone will solve this, and want to engage in the character assassinations of the unvaccinated, or you're anti-vax and you're mega and you're, they wanted to create this false dichotomy and stoke a culture war over a public health issue. And I am so discouraged by the extent to which I see people falling for it and engaging in the discourse in exactly that way. I really want you guys, I want to encourage everybody to try to get that notion out of your mind. Look at this in a nuanced way, you guys. This is a scientific medical issue. This is not a political or cultural issue. Transfer the department in which we're talking about this, okay? This is a tweet here from Savvy on Twitter. If you guys don't follow her, I recommend that you do, @SleepySocialist. She says, anyone saying everyone will get COVID who cares to do anything to reduce the spread should have to spend a week in an ER or ICU. And by the way, she's in the medical field. Easy to say from the comfort of your home, not so much for the healthcare workers that are overburdened, traumatized, and contemplating suicide. Guys, we are 2 years into what has undoubtedly been absolute hell for healthcare workers. Just imagine what these people are having to go through. Imagine if you were a healthcare worker who lived with a relative who might be older or might be immunocompromised. Imagine having to treat COVID patients and then worry that you might be passing that on to a loved one. So, but before you sit there and do this, I understand a pushback against the way the mainstream media has covered this. I really genuinely do. But do not allow CNN to dictate your opinions, you guys. Don't just be a contrarian for contrarian's sake. That's empowering the very corporate talking heads that I know you're trying not to empower. Okay? Think critically about this stuff, you guys. I want to do a thought exercise really quick. Imagine you could go back in time. Imagine supposing you're someone who thinks that this is all overblown and doesn't want to get vaccinated and opposes restrictions and masks and stuff. Go back in time. Imagine you could talk to somebody who was dying of the Black Plague, or somebody who just lost a bunch of their family members to the Black Plague. Imagine explaining to that person why you oppose using the technology that we have to try to eradicate or combat this disease. Imagine trying to explain to them why you don't think we should take this seriously, why you don't think we should mask up and get vaccinated. What would you say to this person who doesn't have that option? And to those who want to talk about natural immunity, listen, it should be taken into account. It's a real thing. It's how our immune system fights the virus. That should be taken into account. But understand, if that's your strategy to get rid of a virus, what happened in Europe? Natural immunity eventually got rid of the plague. A third of Europe died to achieve that natural immunity, you guys. It's so convenient how these people will leave that portion out when they want to talk about natural immunity being the way to eradicate COVID. Okay. And I want to show you a quick little clip here. This is just a minute long, but this is Tom Hartman responding to an anti-vaxxer on his show. And I thought this was a very, I don't know, it's a great way, a comparison, a great metaphor to use to those who oppose the vaccine.
Hey, Tom. I was listening to you for the last hour or so. I heard survival of the fittest. Some of us choose not to vaccinate because
you're nuts, Nicholas.
we work very hard about staying fit, eating healthy, and our natural immune system.
So, Nicholas, if you're so healthy, would you have unprotected sex with somebody who has syphilis or gonorrhea?
You're missing the point.
No, I'm not missing the point. They're contagious diseases. Would you have unprotected sex with somebody who has syphilis and gonorrhea and not worry about it because you're so healthy?
No, I wouldn't do that.
Okay, then why would you expose yourself to COVID without having some protection?
Because the protection is my natural immunity.
No, it's not. Tell that to 800,000 dead Americans. Nicholas, this is a stupid conversation, and I'm not going to continue it.
I thought that was a fantastic argument, you guys. It's a contagious disease. Why would you not do your part to try to keep it from spreading? It seems to me that people are allowing their very admirable anti-authoritarian tendencies to sort of cloud their view on COVID protocols and policies. And I want to make incredibly clear, you guys, I'm not sitting here trying to hand wring at those who are not vaccinated. I'm really genuinely not trying to do that because I don't blame individuals for decisions made by the powerful. The institutional distrust that has led to such a large portion of the populace opposing the vaccines, that's not from the powerless. That's because we have spent decades being servile to big pharma. That's a very reasonable distrust of institutions. The institutional distrust of the CDC is incredibly reasonable because there's this revolving door between big pharma and the CDC. Why would you trust them? I get it. I genuinely get it. And that's not individual people's fault. That's the fault of our institutions. That's the fault of the powerful, who, again, have been nothing but servile to big pharma, including with the opposition to the TRIPS waiver currently. Okay? So I'm not trying to sit here and do this. You're fucking bad. I'm really not. I'm trying to get people to look at this in a little bit more of a nuanced way and not let your sort of culture war instincts take over. This is a public health issue, you guys. Please listen to the microbiologists and the virologists. There are two separate issues as it pertains to the vaccine as I see it. There's the monopolization of profits for medicine, and then there's the efficacy of the medicine. Okay? It's not a big pharma executive who sat in a lab and produced these vaccines. It's virologists and microbiologists who produce these vaccines. By the way, we've been working on mRNA technology for 20 or 25 years, largely in reputable colleges and universities and in publicly funded labs. That technology is not created by some dipshit Pfizer executive making $50 million a year. They're just monopolizing the profits. So please separate those two things as we discuss big pharma and the policies surrounding COVID and the rhetoric surrounding COVID. Think about the healthcare workers, you guys. Think about the vulnerable people in our society. I'm astounded by how many lefties I have seen be so callous and crass about the vulnerable, who say we just need to get back to normal. I'm astounded by it, you guys. What about the immunocompromised? What about the elderly? I thought us lefties were supposed to care about those who were left behind. So I'm again, I am not trying to do this. I'm superior because of my view on vaccines. I'm not. I'm trying to encourage you all to look at this scientifically instead of as though it is some sort of culture or political issue. That is all that I am saying. And to please consider your neighbor, you guys. Consider that person next to you at the grocery store. I said this a couple weeks ago. They may look and seem healthy. You might be next to me. I'm 27 years old and I'm healthy. You might look at me and you say, you know what? He probably is not going to die of COVID. He's probably not going to have any problem if he gets it. You have no idea who I interact with. You have no idea. I have family health issues going on right now with grandparents who I see on a regular basis. Okay? Do you want to expose my grandparents who are vulnerable? So please, you guys, you don't know if that person next to you lives with someone who's elderly or immunocompromised, or works with or interacts with somebody who's elderly or immunocompromised. I just really want to beg everybody not to be so callous and crass about how we talk about this stuff. I understand the anti-authoritarian impulse. I understand the institutional distrust for big pharma and the CDC. I share in that distrust. Please separate that from the science and from public policy pertaining to a public health issue. We need to support the TRIPS waiver. We need to get these vaccines to impoverished countries so that we can vaccinate the world and not leave the impoverished out to dry. And it also would minimize the chances that we're going to have continued variants that render the vaccines and other strategies less effective. Okay? So again, you guys, I'm not trying to sit here and finger wag. I'm really genuinely not. I hate it when the brunch liberals and the MSNBC types are like, let them fucking die because they didn't choose to get vaccinated. That's insane. That's unhinged. Nobody should support that. But at the same time, I am very frustrated by a lot of the rhetoric that I have seen surrounding COVID and surrounding vaccines. And I just really want to encourage everybody to take a fresh look at this and try to engage with some nuance, and don't let your preconceived cultural opinions dictate how you view this, okay? That's all. That's really genuinely all. This Omicron variant is for real. COVID is for real. 800,000 people died in this country alone. We're almost definitely going to hit 1 million at some point, you guys, at least on this path, because these waves just keep coming. So that's all on that. I will move on, although unfortunately to a no less depressing story. This is in The Guardian. It's about climate change. Scientists watch giant doomsday glacier in Antarctica with concern. Cracks and fissures stoke fears of breakup that could lead to half-meter rise in global sea levels. 20 years ago, an area of ice thought to weigh almost 500 billion tons dramatically broke off the Antarctic continent and shattered into thousands of icebergs into the Weddell Sea. The 1,255 square mile Larsen B ice shelf was known to be melting fast, but no one had predicted that it would take just 1 month for the 200 meter thick behemoth to completely disintegrate. Glaciologists were shocked as much by the speed as by the scale of the collapse. This is staggering. It's just broken apart. It fell over like a wall and has broken as if into hundreds of thousands of bricks, said one. This week, ice scientists meeting in New Orleans warned that something even more alarming was brewing on the West Antarctic ice sheet, a vast basin of ice on the Antarctic Peninsula. Years of research by teams of British and American researchers showed that great cracks and fissures had opened up both on top of and underneath the Thwaites Glacier. It's called the Doomsday Glacier, one of the biggest in the world, and it was feared that parts of it too may fracture and collapse, possibly within 5 years or less. Thwaites makes Larsen B look like an icicle. It is roughly 100 times larger, about the size of Britain, and contains enough water on its own to raise sea levels worldwide by more than half a meter. It contributes about 4% of annual global sea level rise and has been called the most important glacier in the world, even the Doomsday Glacier. Satellite studies show it is melting far faster than it did in the 1990s. So what happened here, you guys, is that over the last couple of years, a specific study was done that sort of altered how we looked at this ice shelf. We thought it was more stable than it is. We found cracks that we did not know were present that make it likely that it might break off in the next 3 to 5 years. Okay. It's held in place by an underwater mountain, and it's kind of stuck on that mountain, and we're seeing it start to detach. So this is just a continuation. I'm sure some of you have seen the maps that go year over year and show the Antarctic continent and how much, even in just the last decade or two, it has, melted away. It seems every time I cover climate, it's in this very dark sort of way. It's never good news. We covered a couple weeks ago how the Arctic Ocean is more susceptible to the greenhouse effect than we thought, that it's more susceptible to Atlantification than we thought. We've covered permafrost melting. We've covered all sorts of stuff that's, you all see it with the extreme weather events, with wildfires, with the tornado that just tore through the United States. And this is another horrible, horrible indication that we are crossing lines of no return. And that what we can do now is at best mitigate the damage that we are already starting to see. So, as I've said before, this issue is of particular importance, because what do other issues matter if we're going to end up in a climate apocalypse? What does like healthcare or education matter if we're going to end up in a climate apocalypse, if we're not going to have a habitable planet? And this, I want to also, I saw a scientist who opposed the term anthropomorphic climate change because it's really not human caused. It's capitalism caused. It's our economic structure that prioritizes corporate profits over public action for the greater good. And I'm sure you guys know, some 3/4 of pollution is done by 100 companies. So when people like do this, well, do you drive a car? It's all your fault because you drive a car. Do you use energy in your home? It's all your fucking fault because you heat your home. Shame on you, right? That's absurd, you guys. It's that meme, right? Oh, you want to improve society, yet you're participating in society. It's that. We need to address the economic underpinnings of this problem and address capitalism if we ever hope to address the climate in any substantial way. And we need to if we would like to survive, even just a number of generations down. This is going to affect younger generations quite substantially in the coming years and decades. We've already crossed so many lines of no return. We just have. It seems like every time I fucking research the climate, we're crossing more and more of them. And there's more and more reason for alarm. And the worst scenarios are proven to have even been under exaggerations. So I encourage everybody to take the climate incredibly seriously and to try to combat the corruption and the capitalistic incentive structures that allow for us to destroy the planet for profit. Whatever you can do. And this is another shame on the Biden administration, because we were all told by the liberals, you have to vote for Joe or else Trump's going to destroy the environment. What's Joe done about the environment? He's done fuck all. He's done fuck all. He granted a whole bunch of additional drilling permits and fracking permits. He came out and said he's pro-fracking. It's outrageous. It's just outrageous. The Doomsday Glacier likely to break off in the next 3 to 5 years, raising sea levels by what did they say, half a meter, so 1.5 feet. That's substantial, you guys. And that's only, what did they say, 4% of the contribution to the raising sea level. It's funny to me. This is a bit of a tangent, but it's funny to me how we fearmonger about the debt and deficit and say, you're leaving debt for the kids. What about the children? Well, what about the planet that you're leaving for the children? What about that? Do you think the kids might be better off if they have a habitable planet and a number on a balance sheet that you disapprove of? Or do you think they'd be better off burning alive, but having you see the number that you approve of on a balance sheet? How insane is that argument? How absurd. Why is it that the mainstream accepts the "you're condemning future generations to debt" bullshit, but don't accept the "you're condemning future generations to a climate apocalypse"? Gets me very angry. You guys can see a lot of the stories today got me a little bit worked up, and this certainly no less. So I apologize to be such a downer on the holidays, but I need to bring you guys reality and not sugarcoat it, right? So whatever you can do to combat the climate and combat the corruption and fight against the capitalistic incentive structures, I encourage everybody to do so. And I just wanted to close things out by reminding you all once again about our end of year fundraisers. Donations between now and the end of the year will be matched. So please, give your loved ones a donation if they're progressive. Ask your loved ones for your holiday gift to be a donation to Real Progressives. We will be a very generous donor will be matching donations through the end of the year. So I encourage everybody to participate. If you are unable to participate financially, we also, are always happy to have volunteers. We appreciate any support on social media, and anything that you can do to help us grow. We are engaging in all sorts of activism and organizing and education and policy and media, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And all of that does have the costs that come with it, right? We are a volunteer-only organization. I am not paid to sit here and do this, you guys. So we're all here working for the greater good, and we really would like any help that you can provide. So realprogressives.org for all of our articles and content. If you'd like to get involved, go to realprogressives.org. Check that description box if you want to donate to the end of the year fundraiser. I put the link in there. You can find this page that I have up on the screen in the description box. So thank you all so much for tuning in today, and I will see you all next Sunday at 2 Eastern as usual.